Hi, this is the Fund 8 Auditability Challenges Closeout Report. Let's start with a quick look at the basic details of the challenge. The challenge budget was $200,000. The number of proposals submitted was 22 and the number funded was 6. And as of May 2023, when this report was compiled, 3 of them were complete. The challenge team was Stephen Wittenstall, Joe Allen, me, Vanessa Cardui, and Torsten Potterbaum. And some key changes from the Fund 7 Auditability Challenge. First of all, the challenge budget was doubled, but there were slightly fewer proposals funded. There were 6 as against 8 in Fund 7, but those that were funded were higher budget and were doing more substantial work. So let's have a closer look at the kinds of proposals and teams that got funded. These are the 6 funded proposals in the challenge, and you can see both their original budgets and their progress towards completion as of May. And what we can say about the Fund 8 proposals in general, as we said, they were higher budget and more ambitious in scope than the Fund 7 proposals. In Fund 7, budgets were all under $19,000, but in Fund 8 that was actually reversed and they were all over $21,000. So with a higher challenge budget, it seems that proposers were able to try more substantial proposals. Another interesting thing was that proposals in Fund 8 were even more focused on building thinking and analysis. In Fund 7, the split was roughly 2/3 proposals about building tools versus 1/3 proposals on developing thinking and analysis about audit. Whereas in Fund 8, that was the reverse, 1/3 tools to 2/3 analysis and thinking. So this reflects a growing awareness as a community that building the thinking on how to audit is just as important as the tools and the platforms that we use to do it, and is worth funding. Another thing that is interesting about Fund 8 proposals is that 13 of them were approved but not funded, as against only 3 in Fund 7. So this higher level of approval for auditability proposals in general suggests that there might have been an increase in the community's awareness of and approval of auditability as an issue in general. So that could be an example of how a repeat challenge can help establish the importance of a particular area of work and make the community more aware of and more interested in it. Now let's look at the challenge metrics. The key metric was number of proposals audited, and that was carried over from Fund 7. But just as in Fund 7, this is not quite what emerged from the proposals that were funded in the challenge. Fund 8 proposals were more about building the systems, tools and methodologies to audit with, rather than actually funding people to go and conduct audit. This, on the whole, feels like something positive to us as a challenge team. Building the infrastructure to help us do good audit and then enabling the whole community to be the ones who actually do the monitoring feels like exactly what auditability projects ought to be doing. So in hindsight, we think this metric probably should have been slightly reworded to reflect what auditability projects are actually doing. The challenge aim overall was to ensure transparency in the use of Cardano's treasury resources. And this was addressed well by several of the proposals in the challenge. In fact, it was addressed at least in some way by all of them, but particularly the tools and analysis that were built by C Report, Catalyst Analyzer and KPIs, Project Management and Track Directory, and Wolfram Governance Analytics are setting the groundwork for greater transparency in the use of Treasury resources. There was a second challenge aim as well, which was that we wanted to see different audit approaches being developed for different challenges and different types of proposals. And this metric, although it was carried over from Fund 7, actually began to bear fruit in Fund 8, and particularly Africa-based projects were leading the way on it. Auditing African Proposals and Wider Qualitative Audit Pilot are developing audit approaches that suit particular contexts and particular types of proposals. So as we said, this metric wasn't really addressed at all in Fund 7. So perhaps the audit community at that point was not really ready for it and is now. So this could be another advantage of continuity in challenge setting. A repeated challenge over more than one funding round is able to look at more complex and more nuanced approaches and enable them to be realised. Now here's a pretty little donut chart to show you the proposal's progress as of May 2023 when this report was compiled. You can see that there's one project that's completely finished and closed out. There are two that are complete, but they're working on their closeout or final reports. And there's another three that are in progress. Most of the proposals in the challenge took a little bit longer than they expected or anticipated, and that was for a whole range of reasons, from the personal to the structural. Obviously, you can't legislate for personal life issues that might crop up for individual proposers and slow them down. But on the structural side, for some projects, it's been the closing report which has taken the time. Audit deals with pretty complex issues at times, and also for an audit proposal, the final report is often a much more core part of the work than it is for other proposal types. And projects have found they've had to go quite a long way beyond the standard IOG closeout in order to share their learning effectively. Another thing is the hiatus that we've had between Fund 9 and Fund 10. This has had an effect in that it means communities have shrunk. So any proposal in this challenge that has been working directly with communities, that has adversely affected them to some extent. And also, it's meant that some team members in some projects have had to leave Catalyst to find other work. So that has slowed some projects down a little bit. But nevertheless, the near completion projects are making good progress, and it's worth noting that community-based and co-produced work needs to go at the pace of the community, even if this is a bit slower than what was originally planned. Now let's have a look at some key learnings from the challenge. First off, and it's more a question than a learning, what processes and spaces do we have in Catalyst for projects to share their work long term? Obviously, this is a concern for all projects, not just auditability ones, but it does feel particularly pertinent for auditability projects because, in a sense, it's part of our long-term audit to be able to see over the long term what effects a project's work might have, and to refer back to old projects and the learning from them and reference that and build on it. So apart from Wednesday Town Hall here, how do projects share their learning? Something presented in a town hall, however brilliant it is soon forgotten, and reports and videos are not very searchable or very discoverable. In an overcommitted community, which I think we can say Catalyst often is, it can be quite hard for people to find the capacity to meaningfully engage with other people's work, particularly when it's people who are outside your personal network and who you don't really know that well. Also, a project team might lack the resources to keep on publicising their work after the end of their funding. So what can we do to help projects share their thinking in the longer term and make it easier for people to access and engage with old projects and what they discovered, and to see connections and build on that knowledge? Is it possible that we could learn from, for example, a more bite-sized approach to surfacing individual learning points, such as, for example, the nano-publications approach that's widely used in the biomedical field? Another little learning is, can we use the insights from near-miss proposals, ones that were approved and came close to getting funded but didn't actually get funded, while protecting the proposer's IP? Fund 8 auditability, as we've said, had a high proportion of proposals that were approved but not funded. One quite interesting example was called Renovate Catalyst Funding Mechanism, and it advocated milestone-based funding in what I'd say was a more developed way than we're actually using it now. So this begs the question, does IOG draw inspiration from unfunded proposals? If not, perhaps they should. In fact, perhaps we all should. But if we do, how can we best address intellectual property and ownership of an original idea? to make sure that a proposer, particularly one who is unsuccessful and doesn't get funded, doesn't lose their IP to a more prominent or well-known team. So, was the challenge addressed or solved? This is always a bit of a weird question because it's probably not possible for any challenge to be completely solved, but broadly, yes, it was. Obviously, audit is an ongoing thing. It's never going to be completely wrapped up and solved. But the key elements of the Fund 8 challenge have been well addressed by the funded proposals. And we've also seen the maturing of an audit community in Catalyst, which I think has been partly due to the existence of the two challenges in Fund 7 and Fund 8, and can only be a positive thing. How about future directions for auditability in Catalyst? Well, sadly, as everybody knows, in Fund 9 there was no real space for audit. There was no auditability challenge or governance challenge or similar. That's particularly regrettable given that the official audit process has changed so much for Fund 9 with the introduction of milestone-based funding. It would have been amazing to have audit projects funded to examine how well those changes were working. Nevertheless, going forward, as a challenge team, things we'd like to see include, first of all, more experiment with different audit approaches, including the qualitative. And maybe leading on from that, we'd like to see space to trial new community-led audit methodologies that are relevant to specific types of proposals, as the Fund 8 challenge has begun to explore. Now, maybe the continuous test net that we're hearing about will help make this possible, but actually we'd like to see it in mainstream Catalyst too, which would of course need buy-in from IOG to accept different monitoring approaches as valid. In the long term, we'd like to eventually see an overall decentralisation of audit, perhaps via a toolkit of approaches so that different kinds of proposals can choose a reporting methodology that works for the specifics of their project. So that's about all from us, and thanks very much for watching.